What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about West Side Story. So I actually was hoping to revisit the original 1961 film and do a review here on the channel before doing this one, but it just never ended up happening. I feel like I have no time anymore between work, life, relationships, friendships, YouTube, just, sitting back and just relaxing from time to time, and all the new movie releases and things that are coming out. There's just so much to keep up with, and at least it keeps me busy. But yeah, what I want to say right out of the gate is that, yeah, that original film is something that I remember seeing plenty of times. My mom raised me on a lot of musicals, and she just always had these things on, or my grandfather, a lot of old-timey films. So yeah, this is definitely a classic when it comes to the 1961 film that I have seen on multiple occasions. It has been quite some time, so I didn't go in with the most fresh remembrance of everything from that original film. But as far as its characters, its basic story, and the big songs that are super familiar from the musical, yeah, I definitely knew all of that going into this, and I was definitely curious to see how Steven Spielberg would remake this film. Now, of course, there's a stigma around remakes in general, that they're either usually nowhere near the expectations that people want them to be, that they never really reach the heights of the original film, or that they're just flat out terrible. But maybe sometimes they're okay, but sometimes they're just not all there. However, every here and there are films that kind of break the mold and sometimes are better, or at least compete with the original. Now, of course, it depends on the film, depends on what the original was, and that's not the most common occurrence. But I'm here to say, even though it may be blasphemous for some, that I genuinely found this to be better than the original based on my memory of the original. That doesn't take away from any of the joy and enjoyment I've ever had from the original. I do think it's a really great musical. It's a classic of its time based on the 1957 classic musical. And so overall, what I will say is I thoroughly enjoy that original film for what it is. Being able to see it modernized under the direction of somebody like Steven Spielberg with modern technology and filmmaking tools, but also something that leans very heavily into the filmmaking elements of that time, I think was great to see. And ultimately, I think that Steven Spielberg really nailed it. So right out of the gate, as far as the direction of this film goes, I think that Steven Spielberg made this film a love letter to the story of West Side Story, to the original musical, to the classic film in particular, and ultimately created a new version of the story for a new generation that I think might go down as the definitive one moving forward. Now again, that might be, blasphemous for some, but see the movie and definitely make up your own opinion. I think if anybody enjoys the original more, I couldn't necessarily begrudge them, but watching this one, I can definitely say that I found the performances and a lot about how the film was put together to be a lot better than that original film, even though that original film obviously has tons of great things about it to praise. This film runs in at 2 hours and 36 minutes, making it just 3 minutes longer than the original film. It is a pretty long film, and I will say there were a few moments where things slowed down that I did feel the length of the film just a little bit, but ultimately I found the film to be very well paced. I was consistently entertained once it started going, and there was just so much on a filmmaking level that consistently was keeping me gripped in. Outside of that, if you're not really looking for those elements and you just want to see a story unfold with great music, great performances, and great characters, I think for the most part this movie really does succeed. Now, one thing that I've never really been a big fan of when it comes to West Side Story, and I guess I'll avoid spoilers if you've never seen anything of this story, you don't really know much about it. I mean, this story has been around for a long time. This does take a few liberties here or there, but ultimately it is the same story from the original film. Yeah, there are elements about that original film that I've never been crazy about in terms of certain story directions, and so when they happen here, I didn't necessarily love them either. And one thing about the whole story of West Side Story that I've never really been able to connect with, and I've not really ever been able to connect with a lot of films that do stuff like this, is it's very much based around the premise of, love at first sight. You have this white guy played by Ansel Elgort in this film who plays the character of Tony, and then you have the character Maria, who's a Puerto Rican girl played by Rachel Zegler in this film. And yeah, they end up, meeting each other one time and essentially fall in in love. The film only takes place over the course of a couple of days, and they fall madly in love. And so very much is that old Hollywood tale of two people, locking eyes and falling in love rather quickly. I never really felt that in the original. I never really clung onto that because it's just so unrealistic, and the same goes here. With that said, I'm a huge fan of movies, so it's just part of, the nature and the whimsical and the magic of movies. So that's not to say that that was completely lost on me in this film. I do think they handled it really well in this film, and I was into the romance, but it was definitely a backseat element of the film for me, which is a disappointing part since this movie is all about the romance. However, it's not only about the romance, thankfully, and there is a huge element and a big part of the story that all has to do with prejudice. You have the white folk going against the Puerto Rican folks, and yeah, I really enjoy kind of seeing all that back and forth over the course of this film and the way that Steven Spielberg chose to direct these scenes. I think that this movie does a really great job not only highlighting the fact that, prejudice ultimately leads to tragedy on both sides, but also I love that this film was able to highlight that while also highlighting the elements of each individual culture that makes them who they are. And there are moments where you're looking at both cultures in these scenes where they're battling out, whether it's a dance battle, a sing battle, or an actual battle, and you're able to see the elements of who these characters are and their culture highlighted on screen in a beautiful way that puts a smile on your face. And then at the same time, you have that element that really leans into the heavier side of things and the reality that that kind of prejudice and anger and hate can lead to. And so ultimately, I think that this film did a really great job on that. I think that Steven Spielberg really honed in on that element, and I found myself more engaged in that narrative going on than the fact that you have these two lovers that are in the mix of it all. Of course, they're the ones that kind of push the story forward, but I personally found myself more engaged in this prejudice war around and the characters that were involved in all of that and the way that those scenes were playing out. Outside of that, the music, right? That's what you come to a musical for, and I gotta say the music was great. Now, of course, it's the same music from the original film with the same lyrics, the same songs, and yeah, overall, I really enjoyed the music for the most part. The West Side Story soundtrack has never been one for me that I'm like, let me just listen to this in my car, and yes, I am the kind of person who does listen to musical soundtracks in the car. There's plenty that I do, and that's not to say that West Side Story is a bad musical in any way, shape, or form when it comes to the music. I actually really thoroughly enjoy the music, and I find it to be something that really elevates the story and the material while you're watching it as part of the the movie. And in context, it really works. It really fleshes out these characters and pushes the story further. And I think that Steven Spielberg did an amazing job in this movie of recreating those scenes while also doing things very new and different. And speaking of recreating, what I also loved about this film is that you have Steven Spielberg utilizing old camera angles and old elements of filmmaking when it comes to just the way films of that time were shot and the way that the city would look. And I think ultimately the film does feel like a film from that time, just done with higher quality technology, especially when it comes to the cinematography and the music. There was just elements about how it was all put together, the editing, everything about it definitely felt like a classic film. It doesn't feel like your traditional, more modernized film that we're getting these days. It feels more like an old school film. Everything from the camera angles to just the way things were framed at times, the cinematography, the way that the camera moves, everything about that very much felt like a film from the early 60s, late 50s, and I really enjoyed the way that Steven Spielberg chose to handle that, making it feel like an homage to that era of filmmaking and to the original film, while also giving it that Spielberg magic that you hope to see in any of his films. Ultimately, I really enjoyed the film. Outside of some slower moments where I can admit that I got a little bit boring, I was really into the narrative. I was really into the characters. Again, that whole romance element for me, just because of how rushed it does feel, sometimes takes me out of it and I don't feel fully invested, and I can't really buy into the characters being so emotional after such a small period of time of getting to know each other. However, on a movie magic, just goo goo gaga level, I can enjoy it on that level. This is definitely a love letter to that original story, to that original film, and to that era of filmmaking. And I think that Spielberg definitely created what's going to be a masterpiece for him as time goes on. I think it's going to be something that people look back on and have a lot of fond thoughts on. And again, I genuinely do think this is better than the original. I think that if you're a fan fan of that original film, this one definitely honors that one in so many ways, recreating shots, recreating moments, and not only because it's a remake and we're seeing those scenes done again, but there, is an effort made by Steven Spielberg to recreate some of these scenes to look fairly similar to the exact shot from the original film. Again, utilizing today's modern technology when it comes to filmmaking. I think Steven Spielberg is just continually showing himself to be a phenomenal filmmaker, and I mean, he's got to probably be my favorite director. Whenever I toss it around in my head, like who's my favorite director, I struggle to nail one down all the time, but he always is like the first name that pops into my head. So yeah, love the new Steven Spielberg film. I don't think this is a film that's going to be riveting for everybody. If you're not into musicals, you're probably not going to love it. If you're not into romances, you're probably not going to love it. However, I do think that this film does a great job of honing in on the prejudice war that's taking place and how that affects people on both sides and the tragedy that comes from so much hatred in such a good way that I think that the film is almost more worth watching for that element than it is for, the actual romance element that the film is primarily sold on. Also, I was talking about the music earlier. When I looked online to see who the composer was for this film, it actually was still the composer from the original film, Leonard Bernstein. And so, yeah, kudos to them for essentially using his exact music because there was nobody else credited there as the composer. So I think that's really awesome that they were able to just take that original thing and just make it something new. I also want to praise a couple of actors that were in this film that were just great from beginning to end. Like I mentioned, Ansel Elgort as our main character, Tony, as well as Rachel Zegler as our other main character, Maria, the love interest in this film. Then you have Ariana DeBose, you have David Alvarez, Rita Morena, and Mike Fast. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce his name, but those are just some of the biggest names to definitely praise out of this film. I also really want to praise the vocal performances and the choreography. The way that these scenes were shot was fantastic in and of itself, but it really wouldn't be anything to marvel at if it wasn't for the choreography and the performances being given on screen. Ultimately, I think the cast was fantastic. Their chemistry was very strong from beginning to end, and everybody seemed to know what film they were in. There was a lot of passion from all of the actors in this film. So I've rambled about this a little bit longer than intended, but have you seen West Side Story? Are you planning on seeing West Side Story? Are you a fan of the original? And if you've seen it and you've seen both, did you like this one or the original more? Again, I don't really think I can begrudge anybody who goes in either direction. I can understand, having a preference of one over the other for sure. But yeah, ultimately I found myself enjoying this one more than the original, and I look forward to hearing what more people have to say about West Side Story. So that's going to be my thoughts. Definitely look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. So please hit that like button if you guys enjoy this video, comment your thoughts, subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.